Hello everyone. I guess it seems like this is the most popular talk I've seen ever. Of course the title is a bit aggressive, and I hope he will give warm words for all about our science. So today's speaker is Alex, so he will give us his own secret about giving a good performance talk. So let's welcome Alex.
Okay, thank you, Joseph. Thank you so much. Wow, this is a huge crowd. I'm delighted to see you all here. Can everybody hear me, by the way? You guys back there? Okay, great. So I'm really delighted to be able to give you all this talk. I wanted to say thank you to the organizers for inviting me to give this particular talk. It's a talk that I've been wanting to give for a long time, but it's my first time giving the talk, and so it's a first draft. I hope you'll bear with me. Your science is boring. Except it's not, of course. I'll explain why I give this title. We're talking today about performance techniques for science. We all give these science talks. It's a hugely important part of our job. And so, to do it effectively, there's a lot of things that you want to be thinking about from the performance aspect. And so that's what I'm coming here to talk about today. Your science is not really boring. The fact is that we work on some of the most fascinating and profound questions known to humankind. It's really a rare privilege that we have in this room. And we're really lucky also that the public shares this opinion. I'm sure most everybody in this room has had the experience where you tell someone that you're an astronomer and they go, wow, that's amazing, right? That doesn't happen with every job, right? You tell someone you're an accountant, they don't go, wow, I love accounting. Astronomer is really a special job, and so we are so fortunate that we get to do this. It's really fascinating, and people, non-astronomers alike, they think this is super cool. But what I want to suggest to you today is that it doesn't matter how interesting what you're working on is, whether you're giving a public talk or whether you're giving a talk to your fellow colleagues. It's not so inherently interesting that you're going to keep people's attention. You really need to pay attention to the performative aspects of giving a talk in order to hold people's attention for 20 minutes or 30 minutes or 40 minutes, however long your talk is. You've got to be focusing on these things as well as communicating your science. So I've been asked to give a talk about how to give good talks. That's, there's some pressure associated with that. I'm a little more nervous than I thought I would be, to be honest. What I want to say is, if you think what I have to say is useful, the suggestions that I bring to you, and they are just suggestions, if you think it's useful, then I hope you will take this away and apply some of these lessons to your future talks. If, on the other hand, you think this talk is terrible, then pay attention to what you think is so terrible about this talk and apply those lessons to your future talks. So hopefully it's a learning opportunity in either case. And many of these points may seem like common sense to you. And if that is the case, then that's brilliant, because you're already thinking about these performative aspects of giving science talks, and you're well underway already. So why am I giving you this talk in particular? You may or may not know, just some people in the room probably know, that I was trained as a theater actor before I switched gears and went into science. And so a lot of the sort of instincts and the techniques that we develop in acting school are directly applicable to giving science talks. Now, you don't need to go to acting school to learn these things. That's what I'm here for, to kind of communicate the things that we think about as actors, looking at the performative aspect and bringing it to giving effective talks. I've also spent years talking to public audiences across the whole age range, from elementary students all the way up through enthusiastic adults. And when you do that enough, you will realize that every time you give a talk, you need to be tailoring it to that audience. Who is that audience? What are they here for? What do they want to hear from you? What are they already familiar with? What do they want to learn from you? What can you teach them? It's all audience focused, and this is really a recurring theme, right? It's not about what you want to talk about, it's what they want to get from you. So be thinking about your audience every step of the way. So why should you care about giving a good talk? Well, getting the job for one thing, and I'm not just talking about job talks. I would argue that every talk is a job talk. Every talk you give is an audition, right? Whether you go to a conference or you go to another institute, we've all seen millions of talks, right? Many of them are just whatever, they're forgettable. Some of them are really bad, but some of them are really good. And you really remember the good ones, right? So when you see a good talk, that person just sticks in your mind and you say, oh yeah, we should have them back. We should invite them for a colloquium. And if you're on the job market, you're more likely to, be remembered, and maybe that'll help you get on the short list. Also, winning the funding or the prize, the award, conferences often will give awards for great talks. Or I also went up for an award one time and I had to give a talk as a part of that application process. Communicating your science. This one is huge. So traditionally, and still today, the primary vector for communicating your science results is the journal article, right? But the fact is that there are dozens of journal articles coming out every single day. And so maybe you can keep up with your subfield, but there is no way anyone in the room is keeping up with all of the literature. The stuff that's outside of your focus, you're probably just not paying attention to at all. It's like drinking from the fire hose. So talks are a really effective way of reaching, dozens of people or more at a time and communicating what you've been working on. And this is so important because, I would argue if you are not communicating your science, the science might as well not have happened at all, right? People are not going to be citing your work, they're not going to be building off of your work, they're not going to be replicating your work. So if you are not communicating it, what are you doing it for in the first place? This is not just some afterthought that we do it because, this is just something that we do. You have to communicate it. I think this is really important. Also, exciting your colleagues to collaborate or support your work. I work on, for example, something very niche, exomoons, right? Nobody works on exomoons. I try to get more people involved, but nobody's really getting involved. But I need my colleagues to understand what I'm working on and be excited about what I'm working on, so that if they happen to be sitting on a telescope allocation committee or they are awarding funding, they know, hey, that's some cool work, and I don't work on it, but we need to be supporting that science. So talks, again, is going to be key for that. And then engaging your students. If you're going to be one day a teacher or a professor, you obviously want to be getting your students excited about what you're talking about, and so giving engaging talks is going to be helpful in that way. So where do we start? I like to start with, why does the audience care? You see what I did? I just told you why you should care. So this is where I always start my talks. Why does the audience care? Engage the audience interest from the very first moment. Tell them what is going to be relevant to them in this talk. Identify what they're going to be interested in, and it's not going to be the same thing that's interesting to you, right? We all work on these very niche little subjects, and maybe 10 or 20 people around the world are interested in the exact thing that you work on. So don't make it about what you are so interested in, make it about what the audience is interested in. So again, tailoring everything to the audience. So who is your audience? This is an important thing to identify. Is your audience mixed level of expertise? Like this room, for example, we have undergrads and grad students and postdocs and faculty. Is it all physics and astronomy PhDs? Is it all PhDs in your subfield? This is all going to make a difference in terms of, for example, how long you will spend explaining a given topic, how much jargon you can use without having to explain all that jargon, how many plots that you can show without having to explain every single thing about that plot. And that is all going to relate directly to how much content you're able to cover. And so often you see people build all their slides, and then they're rushing through, I don't have time for this, all right? Okay, we're going to skip that slide, They've thrown all this stuff in there, and then they get up here and they realize they don't have enough time to get through it all, or they spent way too much time explaining something, and they've run out of time, right? So again, focusing on the audience will allow you to tailor each and every talk to make sure that you're getting them the information that they need. And pay attention to them. Are they paying attention to you? And you might be able to make the adjustment on the fly, or nobody's really interested in this, so let's move right along. But at the very least, the next time you give that talk, You can say, all right, this moment of the talk, everybody was sort of checking out, so maybe next time I can leave that out. And then think about your objective. Again, are you sharing your results with your colleagues? This sort of classic communicate your results to the field. Are you looking for collaborators? Are you recruiting? Are you trying to educate your audience? In which case it might be more more background than it is about talking about your individual work. Are you trying to sell an initiative of some kind? Get people involved or get people excited about the work that you're doing? Or are you trying to prove that you've been working on stuff? And this is not what I would recommend, but this is what I think a lot of talks are like. A lot of talks are like, I did all this stuff and I made all these plots and I'm going to show you every plot. The objective is going to dictate the approach. So let me say one thing more about that. A talk is not a paper, right? A paper is designed for outlining every step of the work that you did, right? So it's like a recipe. People can read your paper and replicate the work. You have to demonstrate in a paper that all of your assertions, every single thing that you claim in the paper has to be backed up somehow with a plot or some sort of calculation that you've done to show that you really know what you're doing. And then, of course, finally publishing your results. Talks are a little different. Talks are for sharing the techniques. Obviously, you have to tell the audience what you did and why you did it. Talk about your key results, and you can share your ideas. But the audience generally is going to assume that you know what you're doing, right? You've done your due diligence. You don't need to show the plot that say, yeah, look, it's a good reduced chi-squared, right? It's just, okay, yeah, let's hope it is, because particularly if it's already based on a published paper, then you've gone through the referee process. And you can always have those backup slides, right? Somebody, you might have somebody in the audience who really is just sort of hard-nosed and say, well, how do you know that? I need to see proof. And then you can always have those backup slides and say, yeah, I anticipated this and I'm ready for it. But it doesn't need to be part of the main talk, generally speaking. So let's talk a little bit about the speaker as the performer. The first imperative, be heard. Be louder than the voice in the listener's head is the way that I would put it. So if you were up here and you are mumbling and you're just kind of rambling along and not really being very clear, then it's just that much easier for the voice inside everyone's head to just kind of start a little daydreaming, and you start looking at your phone and you start thinking about other things. So you be loud enough that people will be forced to listen to you, basically. It sounds a little aggressive, but it's going to be effective. If there's a microphone, use it. This spreads the audio around a lot better, and of course our hearing impaired audience members are certainly going to appreciate it. Play to the back row, right? Can you hear me back there? Yes. Now, unfortunately, the people up front are maybe a little blown out by how loud I'm talking. But if you're not being heard by the back row, you've got to be heard by the whole room. And so that's something that they would always, every actor knows, you play to the back row. And so how do you do that? Well, I'm pitching my voice a little higher, right? I'm using more air support. I'm speaking a little slower than I would if I were just talking to a colleague one-on-one. And I'm using more diction. And it's going to feel uncomfortable, but this is the thing that you have to get comfortable with. You're just not having a conversation with tons of here.
I can't.
Yeah, you can. And enthusiasm is contagious, right? This is so important. If you're not excited about what you're talking about, why is the audience going to be excited about it? Because you should be the most excited person about this subject. It would be strange if anyone was more excited than you. But, how often people get up here and they're just like, yeah, so we did this thing. Yeah, I don't know. Be excited. And people will catch on to that excitement, and they're more likely to be excited too. The next thing, mitigate bad habits. When I first made this slide, I said eliminate bad habits. But I changed it to mitigate because eliminate is next to impossible. We all have bad habits, and it's really challenging to get rid of them. They wouldn't be bad habits otherwise. So what am I talking about? Bad speaking habits, for example. Too many ahs and ums and likes, these sort of filler words that we all use. I used to use them a lot too. I'm still using them here and there. It's almost impossible to get rid of it entirely. But identify the problems that you individually have and see what you can do to get rid of them. I hated how much I said, So I noticed it. And now I take a pause. Every time I want to say, yeah, just silently take the pause. What is it for you? Overuse of certain words. I used to say actually all the time. Oh, so this is actually this and this is actually this. Interesting. Everybody has these words that they sort of just go to that well all the time. Identify what it is for you and see if you can strip it out. Weak adjectives or intensifiers. Just say, oh, it's so this or it's very this. You know, when you're giving this talk, you get to prepare it. You don't just get up and improvise everything. You have time to prepare, and so if you're talking about something, you can think about what's the cleanest and most exciting, most interesting way of describing this stuff. Now, I'm saying this aware of the fact that the vast majority of the people in this room are doing science in a second language. And I am extremely fortunate that I get to do this in my native language. So I realize that some of the things that I'm telling you now are going to be even more difficult if English is not your first language. Nevertheless, I would still encourage you that, you know, we, like it or not, we all have to do this work in English, and making your talks more exciting in these ways will be more effective for you. Predictable speech patterns, this is another one. So some of them have names, not all of them have names. There's one very common one called upspeak. Right? Men and women alike do this, where every single sentence kind of goes up, and then I might talk for a little while and I'll say something, but then I'll go up, like that. And every single sentence kind of ends in the same way. Right? You've heard this. It's just one of many sort of predictable vocal patterns. It might not bother everyone. Some people it will really irritate. More to the point though, if it becomes predictable, it just becomes this sort of thing that you just kind of, it just lulls you to sleep, basically. It's easier for you to start checking out when there isn't this vocal variety. So think about the vocal variety. Think about highs and lows, and you can go fast and you can go slow. And that will all help you engage with your audience a little better. Bad physical habits. Overuse of your hands. Now, I use my hands all the time. But I try to be a little more deliberate about the way that I'm using my hands. Sometimes people will just be sort of flailing. I mean, being a little crazy right now, but I mean, you know, just nervous energy. Right? They don't know what to do with their hands, so they're just kind of, right? So that can be very distracting. It can also be, you know, not quite as distracting, but if you're not using your hands at all, if you just kind of stand here the whole time and don't do anything, it becomes a little stagnant, and people start checking out. Everything is just sort of, you're getting a little sleepy while watching. So, you know, be a little animated is a good thing. Just try not to be too animated, I guess is my point. Nervous body movements more generally. People will pace, people will sort of sway, people will do all kinds of things because they don't feel comfortable up here, right? So think about planting yourself. Just, you know, your feet are on the ground and you're standing in one place. And then of course you can be deliberate with your hand motions, or if I'm stepping over here and I'm going to point at the slides, then, you know, make it deliberate. Don't have all of this sort of nervous, extraneous physicality. And then staring at the screen. We see so many people doing this. Yeah, I'm just looking at the screen and I'm going to read everything off the screen, and you can read it too, but yeah, you know, I'm looking here. You can be a weatherman, right? Just out to the audience, right? Stay engaged with the audience, and they're more likely to engage with you. You know what's up here, and you can see it down here. So just don't stare at the screen. As much as possible, put your focus out here. So how do we mitigate these solutions? Record yourself. I think this is a huge thing. This is very uncomfortable for people. People hate hearing their own voice. You can do it audio. You can use your phone, obviously video record yourself. It's uncomfortable, but I guarantee all of a sudden when you start paying attention, precisely because you hate it, right? I hate my voice. You'll start being super critical of what you're doing, right? All of these bad habits. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I said that a million times. Just keep saying the same thing. You know, you don't want to hear it. So it's really going to help you zero in on your particular issues that could use a little attention. And practice, practice, practice. When you're giving a talk, you make the slides and then practice it. I practiced this talk several times. Now, when it comes to, you know, giving the talk or practicing it, try to avoid memorizing a written script. This is something that a lot of, particularly more junior scientists, I will notice, will do. Also, people who are maybe not so comfortable using English will certainly do this, and that's completely understandable. But what you will notice is that sometimes when you're writing it, you'll put way too much information into a sentence. It's, you know, the way that we listen to speech is very different from the way that we read and different from the way that we write. So in my experience, a lot of times people will write their script out and they're just cramming way too much into a given sentence. And the audience is like, you know, it's overflow, it's too much. Also, if you've memorized this script, you might, you know, forget what you're gonna say, you get a little more nervous because you're not using the words that you planned on using. Or if somebody, you know, interrupts you, suddenly you get off track. So, you know, if you can, avoid memorizing a script. Instead, just get up, you make your slides, you rehearse it, you just talk it through like a normal person, just say what you want to say. Give the talk a few times, see how long it takes you to say these things. Sometimes I will rehearse it and I say, my gosh, I just spent 6 minutes on that slide. I didn't think I was spending that long on that subject, but you really did. So talk it through, identify the areas, particularly the areas that are tricky to explain. You find yourself getting really gummed up talking about this thing. You're looking for the right words. So take a moment, stop yourself while you're rehearsing and say, what's a cleaner, a more succinct way of saying that? And what you will notice, I think, is after 3 or 4 times of going through the talk, you just kind of naturally zero in on the ways that you want to say something. You'll just start saying the same words over and over again, and you've basically got it memorized. Every talk you give will be a little different, but you'll more or less be saying the same thing. You've memorized it more or less by accident. So that was a segment on, sort of the performative aspect of, of being a speaker. Now I just kind of want to zero in, particularly on some issues that I see, in the way that people build their slides. For one thing, and this is in no particular order, one thing you'll see sometimes is a dissonance between what is being said and what's on the screen. Right? Again, I've probably made this mistake a little bit here too, because I'm going off a script sometimes. But if there is too much of a mismatch between what's going on the screen and what you are saying, this can just be a little disorienting for the audience. Right? People are, some people will stare just at the screen the whole time. Some people will just pay attention to what you're saying. Some people are moving back and forth. I think I'm definitely doing that. And so if I'm reading and then I'm hearing and these things are too out of whack, it can just be a little disorienting for the audience. Another problem that I see a lot, unexplained domain-specific jargon. So unless your audience is entirely within your own subfield of astronomy, I guarantee that you are using terminology, jargon, that not everybody is familiar with. I bet a lot of people have had this experience when you're talking to, I've been to conferences, for example, and talked to a more junior scientist, and they're working on something very different from what I work on. And they look at me and they say, oh, well, this, Alex has got his PhD already, so he must know everything that I'm talking about. They work on black holes, I work on exoplanets. And so they will use all this sort of black hole terminology, and they're just rattling it off, and I'm like, I don't understand any of this. It happens a lot, right? So really, you'd just be surprised. You really think about all the jargon that you use in your little subfield that is just not used. I was also surprised when I went into exoplanets, and then I would get these questions that I thought were like, everybody knows this about exoplanets, and turns out really people do not, right? Even so basic stuff. So when you're introducing terminology, so for example, I might say, this is a light curve. This is a plot of a star's brightness over time. You can just add those little parentheticals. You're still going to want to use the jargon, obviously. So define it quickly the first time that you use it, and then help out the audience a little bit by reminding them periodically. If you introduce a term on slide 5, and then don't use it again until slide 25, you know, the audience could probably use a little reminder. And the same thing goes for variables. I mean, we've all taken physics and astronomy classes, but let's just not assume that everybody knows what A or J or Psi or whatever Greek letter you've come up with is going to be familiar to everyone. I mean, maybe I know what it is, but there's way more concepts and way more values out there than Latin and Greek letters. So it's not always obvious what you're using there. So just quickly define it. It's not, doesn't take long, but it will really help out your audience. And contextualize, contextualize, contextualize. Remember that you're telling a story, right? We're so used to hearing sort of a narrative arc. So this is just going to help the audience understand where we are. Your audience is going to forget what the overarching objective is. You started saying, you know, you started the talk saying, this is where we're going, this is what we're doing. But by slide 20, they're just looking at random plots and like, where does this fit in? So tell them, right? Do the thinking for the audience. Connect the dots for the audience. Don't make the audience think, how did we get from point A to point B? Every time that the audience is going off on one of these sort of confused moments, that they're paying less attention to you, right? So at first I said, do the thinking for the audience. That's not entirely accurate, because ideally your talk should engender some sort of interesting thoughts in the brain of your audience. Your audience should be like, yeah, wow, I never thought about that. And then they might go off in some other direction. But what you don't want them doing is, I don't buy this, or what's going on here, you know? Just connect the dots and anticipate those moments of confusion, right? You'll say, put something up, and you know, the audience is gonna be like, I don't think so. And so you can just get out in front of it and say like, yeah, I know what you're thinking. Yeah, it looks weird, right? But promise, that's really what's going on. So anticipate those things. Ugly slides. How jarring was this just now, this big white slide? Make slides visually appealing. Use pretty pictures. Use nice fonts. Use color palettes that are attractive. I'm not an artist. I don't, you know, I haven't had any training in what makes something look pretty. But I do know that this looks prettier than what you're just looking at, right? Just so much easier on the eyes. And so, you know, there's a time and there's a place for white slides with black font. But to the extent possible, if you can get away with something that's just a little more visually appealing, I think your audience is going to appreciate that. Overly complicated slides. You see this all the time. It's 10 bullet points. It's just a wall of text. Sometimes people will basically just copy and paste stuff from their LaTeX document and put it right on the slide. And whole paragraphs. And they're talking at the same time. How am I supposed to read a paragraph and listen to you at the same time? It can be very, very distracting. So my sort of rule of thumb is one big idea per slide. And you know if you've done it correctly, because basically you can put the header up there. Just here's the problem, complicated slides. And then your bullet points will be in service of that. And if you can't really distill it down that simply, then maybe you've got too much on one slide. And we have an infinite number of slides, right? There's no shortage of slides. So if you need 2 slides, just put it on 2 slides. If you needed 3 slides, just put it on 3. Equations. Now, this is going to be obviously very domain specific. Some of us are on the more observational side, some of us are on the more theoretical side. Obviously, some talks really rely on a lot of theory and a lot of equations. Nothing wrong with theory, nothing wrong with equations. But what I would say is use the ones we need. Sometimes people throw 10 equations up on the board. Here's all the equations of state, or here's all this or that. Oh, we only need to pay attention to the top 2 there. Everything else is just, don't need to pay attention to it. How many times have you heard people say like, oh, just don't look at what I've put on the slide. You know, why are you putting it on the slide? Right? If you need those 2 equations, just put those 2 equations on there. Only the ones we need. And don't include it to look smart, right? I know you wouldn't say this, you know, this would be a subconscious thing, not like, hey, I want to look smart, I'm going to put a bunch of equations on there. But I do think that a lot of people will put these equations on there and be like, wow, look how impressive this is, right? And we don't need to be impressed by it, right? Really what the audience is doing is, what's going on here? How does this relate? Some people read equations very easily. Some people it's a little more challenging for. So the key is you know, include it if it simplifies the point. Equations are great at distilling down in one single expression, you know, all these different factors that are at play in a given physical situation, right? So instead of having to use a bunch of words, you can just put the equation there. And yeah, it can be very simplifying. But if there's a billion equations on the screen, then everybody, you know, at least some people will just get really lost in the process. And then point out and explain the relevant features of this equation, right? You might have all these different values in there, but you only have one independent variable, right? So you're showing it to say like, okay, well, we're interested in this feature that's got an exponent on there. So it scales like, you know, like 1 over r or something like that. You see what I mean? Point out the things in the equation that you specifically want the audience to pay attention to. It's just not self-evident. Now, this image is obviously really overkill. I would never put something like this in a slide. But the point is that every single feature of that equation is something that could potentially need explanation. So where you think it would be very valuable to explain to people, oh, look, this is an integral over a closed surface or something like that. Now, again, it's dependent on your audience. If everybody is super comfortable with these kinds of equations, you're not going to have to do the explanations. But if it's a mixed crowd, you know, some people in the audience could really use your help. So just help them out. It's not too challenging. And make the takeaways clear. What are you trying to say by showing these equations? You know, just make it obvious. Just don't require the audience to draw the conclusions for you. Draw the conclusions for the audience. And then finally, this is the last thing that I want to talk about. Difficult to read or difficult to interpret plots. When it comes to plots, again, err on the side of explaining too much. You don't want to explain every single thing. This is why you're paying so much attention to who your audience is. What do you have to explain? What do you not need to explain? But generally, go farther than you think maybe you need to. If you have complicated axes, sometimes we have these really crazy things on the axes. You know, can you explain it in simpler terms? If so, you know, you can annotate it or you can point out to it, right? I think about stellar rotations, right? There's this thing called the Rossby number. Okay, well, what's the Rossby number? Well, it's this thing that people routinely plot on the x-axis. Oh, yeah, it's the Rossby number. And people will say, well, what's the Rossby number? Oh, it's basically just star rotation. Okay, well, write that somewhere, you know? It's fairly straightforward to just give these little annotations with your voice or visually, ideally both, that will just help people kind of say, okay, I get it. This is not my field, but I have a sense of what it means for a star to rotate. I never heard of the Rossby number, but I know what a rotation speed is, right? If there's proxies like that, it can be very helpful for your audience. And what are the key features of the plot? Okay, we've got these scattered dots, and we've got a line through it. What are you showing me? Are you showing me that it's a good fit? Are you showing me that it's a bad fit? Are you showing me that it's a power law? What is the takeaway? And what am I supposed to focus on? Because sometimes you take a plot either from your paper or somebody else's paper, and there will be a lot of stuff all in one plot. So if you can zero in and, you know, put a little circle, or this is the thing I really want you to pay attention to. Sometimes you don't get to manipulate other people's plots, but you know, what is the takeaway from this plot? And how is the plot in service of the point you're making? Always coming back to that contextualizing. You think, okay, this is where we were going. And this is why I'm showing you this plot, because it is in direct service of the objective or the question that we're trying to answer. And include as few as possible per slide. Right? Sometimes you need multiple plots on one slide because you want to compare one to the next. You're seeing different relationships in different circumstances. Sometimes you need a lot of plots. But as few as you can get away with is going to be better. Obviously, they get smaller and smaller. I mean, how many times have you seen a slide that's got 20 plots on it? It's tiny, and you can't really figure out what's going on there. They'll say, oh, just pay attention to that one. If you just want me to pay attention to that one, just feature that one. So, here's, I've come to the end of my talk already, believe it or not. Just key takeaways. Talks are a performance, so I would really encourage you to pay attention to the performative elements. I guarantee that it will help you give a more effective talk and more, better achieve your objectives. focus on what the audience wants and what the audience needs from you. Again, it's not about what you want to say, it's about what they want to hear from you. Find a synergy between your slides and what you're saying. Make sure you're kind of on the same page always. Do the thinking for your audience, connecting the dots, contextualizing everything so that they're not just daydreaming or they're not going off in some weird direction because you didn't help them figure out what the point of it all was. And mitigate distracting elements, whether it's in your speaking style or whether it's in your slides. Just focus in on really the essentials and strip away all the distractions. I think all of these things will help you give somewhat more effective talks. So that's all I got. Thanks very much for your time.
Okay, I guess we have maybe many questions for him, and you can tell him that what you were actually expecting from this talk, so you can criticize his talk.
Yeah, you can tell me everything that sucked about it. I don't know what kind of questions you would ask about a talk like this, but anyway, if there are. Yes, Claude.
Do you have any cues that you notice in the audience that they're starting to lose focus or interest in your talk, and how can you bring them back into focus?
Yes, the question is, are there any clues, things that you might notice in the audience members that are suggesting that they're tuning out? I think looking at your phone, for example, people sitting on their laptops. Sometimes people just come to work, you know. I could never do that, frankly. I could never like sit there and listen to a talk and work on my laptop at the same time. It's one or the other. Yeah, people daydreaming, staring off in the other direction. But the phone is the big thing. As soon as people start checking out, they start looking at their phone. And, you know, I think you can just, first of all, take note of that and try to re-engage with what you're talking about. Okay, I'm losing them. What do I need to do to get back on track? I need to be a little more engaging as a speaker in that moment. But then also just, you know, like I said before, next time you give the talk, you know, pay attention. Maybe you can make a little mental note about where you started losing people. And maybe next time around, don't spend 5 minutes talking about that sort of esoteric thing, right? You can skip over because nobody's really interested in it, right? But yeah, the performative aspect is going to be a key aspect of it, I argue, and so that's more or less going to be just a hint to you that next time you need to work a little harder for their attention. Yes, John.
You talked a little bit about plots and text and blocks of LaTeX tables on slides. What about animations and videos?
Yes, I did. I should have put that in here entirely. It goes a little bit with like the pretty slides, but I think people love animations, right? People love pretty plots. The prettier your plot is going to be, obviously you do that sort of at the science stage, right? And you're going to make pretty plots for your paper and then hopefully bring them over. But yeah, absolutely. If there's anything that you can do to make it more visually appealing, I think that's super effective.
So, one way to engage audience to interact with them, for example, using questions or other things.
Right.
So what kind of tricks you would like?
Yeah, I didn't talk about that obviously, but I think that's super valuable as well. Talking about asking your audience questions directly. Some people might ask the question, but it's more rhetorical. It's just sort of getting you thinking about it without making it directly interactive. Some people will really stop and some be like, "What's the answer?" You know, I always hate when that happens, to be honest. But I do think it's effective. It puts a jolt into the audience. Right? Everybody will sort of be bashful, being like, you know, what's the biggest collection of stars? You know, you ask an astronomer, a room full of astronomers, a very obvious question, and everyone is just like, "Is it a galaxy?" You know? Yes, good answer. You know, yeah, I think that's you know, this is not an exhaustive list, I would say, in terms of the ways that you can engage the audience. So long as you are thinking about how can I make sure that they are engaging with me and not checking out, is you know, whatever you can do to make sure that you're achieving that. I think that's great. Yes.
Is there any particular tips on
Online
online talks?
talks. Yes. Online talks are really hard. And we all did it during COVID, right? And I don't know. Online talks are another beast, especially if everybody's watching from home. It's people are just like, oh yeah, I've got to feed my cat. And you know, there's no competing with that. At least here I have a captive audience. You know, I'm going to see if you escape halfway through. People will still do that, obviously, but yeah, online talk is going to be much more challenging. A lot of the stuff that I've talked about here, using your voice, for example, it's just not going to even work in that sort of environment. So I guess the best you can do is really make more interesting slides. And you know, the fact is, I didn't really put this in the slides, but the fact is that, you know, in 2024, we are steeped in TikToks and really amazing YouTube videos. And you know, the content that is available to us now on any topic that you want is so slick and has all of these stock photos and stock videos and everything like that. And we're still giving, you know, glorified versions of, you know, put something on an overhead projector, right? We're really doing something that's a little archaic almost. So, you know, that's just a fact of the matter. You can't just turn your talk into a YouTube video, obviously. But if you have that awareness that people are kind of more used to slicker production values, that's the starting point. That's all I can say, right? How do I engage with my audience? That's going to be challenging, especially in that environment. Maya.
So how many minutes should you devote to things? Like in the particular talk, like particular slide? Should we be like talk like 30 seconds per slide and move to a new topic, or should we just let it seep through and maybe take maybe 2 to 5 minutes per slide and just 10 slides from talk instead of 3 slides?
Yeah, it's going to be a matter of your style, obviously, to some extent. I definitely wouldn't stay too long on any given slide. I think when you reduce your slides to fewer points per slide, that's automatically going to make you move on faster, right? Yeah, you will definitely see people spend 5 minutes on a slide when there's just a wall of text and, oh yeah, I've got 10 bullet points here, and they're all visible at once. And people will just spend 5 minutes on that slide. It's just extremely boring to look at. And so I don't, you know, you don't want to feel like you're racing through, clearly. There's going to be some happy medium there. But just enough for people to get the point and move on. And you can always come back to it. You know? But I think, yeah, you're going to have to feel it out. Sure.
So like, okay, this is one of the bad habits that I have, and I personally see that. So I would not spend a lot of time on the literature or the history of a particular topic. Let's say if I'm giving a talk on exoplanets, I would not go that in 19-something hundreds somebody just started observing, and I'll quickly jump to maybe Kepler and then maybe occurrence rate and then maybe whatever I did. So how important is giving like a large or what fraction of your talk should be like the historic background versus your results and future work?
Yeah, I think it comes back to knowing your audience and knowing what they need. You know, if you're and what your objective is, right? Is it more an educational talk, or whether it's all about the work that you've done? If you are, for example, going for an award, or you know, clearly conference talks are going to be the kind of thing where you're there to talk about. You're there to talk about your work, right? And clearly, especially when you're in a conference talk and they're giving. Every talk is sort of in the same field. Like how many times have you been to a conference talk and you get like 10 introductions on the same thing, right? So usually in those cases you can skip it. But But yeah, it's going to be entirely based on who your audience is, what they need from you, and if they need all that background, then you just can't talk about as much stuff in your allotted time, or just focus on what is the absolute essential background. You can never give this exhaustive history of everything. It's way too deep. It's always going to be way too deep. So just what is absolutely most essential to set up what you're about to say, I think is the way forward.
One more.
Yeah.
Maybe more applicable to the younger people here. I mean, especially with their first few talks that they have to do. Stage fright can really screw up your initial pitch in the first few slides. And I feel like maybe your experience as a performance actor maybe have some tips to help overcome that point. Do you have anything you can share with us about how to get through that initial anxiety and
Sure.
start up the slides?
Yeah, it's a great point. I think I mentioned at the beginning of the talk that I was more nervous than I thought I would be. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I get up and I've planned this talk. I've given a lot of talks. All of a sudden, I feel the adrenaline a little bit. I've got a lot of people paying attention to me, and what do I know about this stuff? I mean, I'm getting up and like, why are you guys listening to me in the first place? You have that sort of self-doubt, and you have that adrenaline. How would you mitigate it? Breathing. This is huge. Just center yourself, really. Breathing is hugely important. But more important than that, I think, is the preparation. I think if you have practiced your talk, you can kind of go into autopilot, and you don't have to, you're not thinking about what you're going to say anymore. I mean, you're still thinking about it, but the more preparation you do ahead of time, the less you're going to be nervous about forgetting to say this or forgetting to say that. And the more you can just kind of launch into it, and that will carry you through the nerves. And the nerves will, hopefully eventually subside. I was feeling the adrenaline the first couple of slides, and then it kind of went away, right? Now you kind of just get into the zone, and you kind of start doing it. That takes practice. I've been a performer all my life, so I understand that some people feel a lot more nervous about giving these sorts of talks. What I would say for the junior scientists, in particular, one thing that I found very scary when I was a junior scientist was being afraid of questions that I didn't know the answer to. And those happen a lot. You haven't been doing this for years and years. In case of the folks who were doing summer projects here, you just started working on this, 3-4 weeks ago or something like that? And yet you're still going to get these questions being like, did you consider the 13 to 12 transition of the, I think that's really going to screw up your results. You're going to get these kind of questions sometimes. I think the best advice that I can give in those situations is never pretend to know something that you don't know. And all you have to say is, I don't really know the answer to that. It sounds like a good question, and we'll look into it, basically. So some version of that is going to, that'll sort of be a catch-all for any question you don't know how to answer. And remember, particularly as a junior scientist, that you've got somebody kind of giving you marching orders, right? So, you can talk to my advisor about that. I mean, as much as possible, you should try to anticipate those questions and be able to answer them yourselves. They're going to be good questions. The more you know about your subject, the more comfortable you're going to feel. But almost always you'll get a question that might sort of just throw you for a loop. And if that's the case, the best possible thing you can do is just be honest about what you can say, what you can't say. Sometimes I will think out loud, say, I hadn't thought about that. I guess, there might be a scaling relationship there. You might be able to answer the question a little bit by thinking out loud. But just don't pretend to know what you don't know. And that'll help you out a lot. All good questions.
Okay, if there's no more question, let me end up with a light question. So how many times or how many minutes have you spent on this talk?
How practicing it, you mean?
Yeah.
I
in terms of-
probably practiced it 4 or 5 times.
Okay.
In my free time, of course.
Okay, thanks for his very invaluable tips for giving a good performance talk. So let's thank Alex again.